The conversation has already moved beyond a simple reaction and turned into something much deeper. What started as a comment from Tasha K about Melody Shari quickly became a debate about truth, perception, and who really controls a story once it enters the public space. This is where things begin to feel layered, because it is no longer just about what was said, but about how those words reshape everything people thought they understood. When Tasha K gave her opinion, it did not feel casual. It felt intentional, like she was placing a different lens over a situation that has already been talked about for years. The story involving Melody and Martell has always been presented as a painful situation, filled with betrayal, emotional struggle, and attempts to rebuild something that kept breaking. That has been the dominant narrative. That is what people have watched, discussed, and reacted to over time. But then suddenly, a different version is introduced, one that suggests maybe things were not as simple as they appeared.
That shift is where the tension begins, because when a situation that has been widely accepted as betrayal is reframed as something mutual or understood, it does more than offer a new opinion. It challenges the emotional truth that many people connected with. It makes the audience question what they believed, and more importantly, it makes them question the person at the center of the story. As the conversation continued, it became clear that this was not just about disagreement. It was about control. Control of the narrative, control of perception, and control of how the audience interprets everything that has happened. Because once a new idea is introduced, even if it is not proven, it starts to live in people's minds. It creates doubt. It creates curiosity. And sometimes it creates division. Some people began to ask questions that they had never asked before. If this situation lasted for so long, does that mean there was some level of understanding? If there were multiple chances given, does that change how we see the situation? These questions may sound simple, but they carry a lot of weight, because they can slowly shift how people interpret the past. But there is another side to this that cannot be ignored. Time does not always mean agreement. Staying does not always mean acceptance. People remain in difficult situations for many reasons, and those reasons are often emotional, not logical. They stay because they hope things will change. They stay because they believe in what they once had. They stay because walking away is not as easy as it looks from the outside.
And that is where Melody's story has always been grounded. It has been about trying to fix something that kept falling apart. It has been about giving chances, about holding on, about believing that things could be different. That does not sound like a mutual arrangement. That sounds like someone trying to save something that mattered deeply to them. So when a different narrative is introduced, one that suggests things were more balanced or understood, it can feel like a contradiction, because the emotional reality that has been shared does not align with that idea. The visible pain, the public breakdown, the repeated conflict, none of that reflects a situation where everyone was on the same page. This is why the reaction has been so strong. It is not just about disagreement. It is about how that disagreement is framed. Because there is a difference between offering a perspective and reshaping someone's lived experience. And when that line is crossed, people notice. Another important layer in all of this is the role of platforms. Tasha K openly acknowledged that certain conversations perform well, especially when they involve well-known figures like Melody. That honesty brings up an uncomfortable truth. Drama attracts attention. Controversy drives views. And sometimes, narratives are amplified not because they are accurate, but because they are engaging. This creates a situation where storytelling becomes complicated. Because it is no longer just about sharing information. It becomes about what keeps people watching,
what keeps them talking, and what keeps the conversation alive. And in that process, the original story can start to shift. When one side of a situation is repeatedly given space to speak, while the other steps back, the balance changes. The audience starts hearing one version more than the other, and over time, that version can begin to feel more dominant, even if it is not complete. This is where Melody's decision to step away from interviews becomes significant. It was not just a random choice. It was a response to a pattern where the focus kept returning to the same painful chapter instead of moving forward, a pattern where her story was being revisited in ways that may not have felt fair or balanced. Silence in situations like this is often misunderstood. People assume it means there is nothing left to say, but sometimes it means the opposite. It means there is a decision being made to no longer participate in a conversation that feels one-sided or unproductive. And that decision changes things. Because when one voice becomes quieter, the other voices become louder, and that can shape how the audience sees everything. At the same time, there is another contradiction that stands out. The idea that things have been resolved while still making comments that feel critical or dismissive. That creates confusion. Because resolution usually comes with a shift in tone. It comes with a sense of closure. But when subtle shots are still being taken, it suggests that not everything is as settled as it appears. This mix of peace and tension creates an unclear space. It leaves the audience wondering what is real and what is just being presented as real. And that uncertainty keeps the conversation going. Because in the world of public commentary, nothing exists in isolation. Every statement connects to something bigger. Every opinion influences how people think. And every narrative shapes how a story is remembered. As the discussion continues, more people are beginning to look deeper. They are not just reacting to what is being said, they are analyzing it. They are comparing it to what they have seen before. They are asking whether the new narrative actually fits the facts that have been shown over time. And that is where the real conversation begins. Not in the initial reaction, but in the reflection that follows. Because once people start questioning, the story becomes more than just entertainment. It becomes something that requires thought, attention, and awareness. There is also the question of responsibility. When someone has a large platform, their words carry weight. They reach a wide audience. They influence opinions. And that influence comes with a level of responsibility that cannot be ignored. Because when you speak on someone else's experience, especially one that involves pain and public scrutiny, the impact goes beyond views and engagement. It affects how that person is seen. It affects how their story is understood. And sometimes, it affects how they are treated by the public. That is why this situation feels so complex. It is not just about who is right or wrong. It is about how stories are told, how they are shared, and how they are received. On one side, there is Melody, who has consistently shared her experience as one of betrayal and strength. On the other side, there is a perspective that suggests things were not as simple. And in between, there is the audience, trying to make sense of both. But the truth is, there may never be a clear answer, because every story that plays out in public is shaped by perspective. And perspective is influenced by many things, including personal beliefs, past experiences, and the way information is presented. So instead of looking for a single answer, it becomes more important to ask the right questions. Does the new narrative align with what has been seen over time? Does it explain the outcomes in a way that makes sense?
Does it reflect the emotional reality that has been shared? And most importantly, who benefits from this version of the story? Because that question often reveals more than anything else. As the conversation continues to grow, one thing remains clear. This is not just about a comment or a reaction. It is about how stories evolve once they are in the public eye. It is about how narratives can shift, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly.
And it is about how the audience plays a role in all of it. Because every view, every comment, every discussion adds to the story. It keeps it alive. It shapes its direction. That is why it is important to stay aware, to listen carefully, to look beyond what is being said and consider why it is being said. Because not every narrative is neutral. Not every perspective is complete.